Welcome to episode 1 of Social Seance Society. My name is Tara, and today I am joined with my amazing co-host, Jessica.
Hello.
Hello. Okay, Three Spooked Girls listeners, I'm going to get this out of the way. We feel really nervous and awkward right now. So if you're new and haven't listened to us before, we'll get into who we are in a moment. So in this podcast, we will be interviewing fascinated, like-minded people who resonate with the saying and my favorite meme and because there's a bunch of versions of this meme, and that is the horrors persist, but so do I. Along with this, we will be discussing hot topics and not really sure how this is going to go. This is very out of our wheelhouse. This is very new.
Mhm.
So there is possibility for evolution of the show. We might have full hot topic episodes. We'll see. We'll see. To be really real with you, our Three Spooked Girls listeners, our true crime and paranormal podcast is why we are here, and the fact our network believed in us. So for these first 2 episodes, you'll hear from the 2 of us, your hosts. And starting in February, we have some incredible guests lined up. We have been prepping and recording for this since October. So
Mhm.
lots of great stuff coming. We are super excited. Thank you guys so much for listening. So if you are hearing my voice for the first time, Jessica and I, like I mentioned, are the co-hosts of Three Spooked Girls, a true crime and paranormal podcast. 3SG and this show are a part of Bloody Disgusting's podcast network, Bloody FM. And in this episode, you all are going to get to know Jess on a deeper level. And then next week, my panicky ass will be in the hot seat. So, it's going to be great. It's going to be great. So thank you guys so much for tuning in today. How it's going to kind of go is what we like to do on our other show is after we do a very heavy episode, we kind of end it with a little bit lighter note or if there's any positive. So it's a little okay, we live in a hellscape, so it really will depend. But how it's going to go is I have this interview planned out with Jess that we're going to get into now. And then at the very end, I wrote down a couple hot topics that are happening here in society that we're going to chat about. So hopefully we'll wrap us up nicely. But that's really all I have. So we're going to just go ahead and dive in. So for those that may not know, Jessica is my best friend of almost 20 years. And we have been doing Three Spooked Girls since 2018. So we've been around. We've been around for a while. And
Mhm.
the reason I wanted to start us with Jessica's story is because if you listen to our other show, you know little bits and pieces, but Jessica's lived a lot of lives, including escaping an evangelical cult.
It's true.
So that is where we are. And so we're just going to get right into it. So before we get into the culty cult, can you tell our listeners a little about you and also what kind of content you have planned that you're going to be doing in 2025?
I am a 38-year-old political junkie. I work in government relations. I do grassroots, and I love it. I work in California, and I work for the medical association there. And I think I fell in love with us podcasting. Really, it was like our first episode we ever did, and I loved the banter that we had, and it just kind of became part of who I was. So now it's like part of me. I don't know. It's like really it's really hard to talk about yourself when you're like, what do I say? But yeah, I read a lot. I mean, Tara's going to ask me a bunch of questions. The content that I'm planning for 2025 is probably going to be a lot on Substack. It's probably going to be a lot of my writing because I told myself that's what I wanted to focus on this year, and I've set myself up for immense failure in a wonderful New Year's goal, which is to watch 104 movies and do reviews on them. Because if you were a patron of Three Spooked Girls, you know that I used to do Jessica Slaughter's movie reviews and plot lines. So I'm planning on taking that into like the word form over there. So that's kind of where I'm at. I just haven't done it because it's only day 10 or 11, 12, whatever
That's
day this is.
okay. 12.
But I'll
Yep,
get
12.
there. I'll get there.
I love it. And the thing I like too with writing and Substack is it feels, at least for me, it feels a lot like less pressure to it than
Mhm.
other kind of like content
Yeah.
creating. But Jessica's an amazing writer for those that don't know. So I'm very excited that she's kind of getting back on the horse with all of that because she's got stuff that she needs to finish because y'all, it's great. But this is great. I love it. I'm so excited for you and I will be reading and reposting every single one, of course.
Oh, thank
So,
you.
duh. Now, okay, like we mentioned or like I mentioned, Jess has lived a lot of lives. So
I have.
let's start from the beginning. Let's start from your childhood and let's talk about what that looked like for you growing up.
Well, I had a very, like, non-traditional traditional childhood. I know that sounds contradictory, but when I was, like, 2 months old, my birth mom just decided that parenting wasn't for her, and you know what? I wanna say this, there are people out there who are just not meant to be parents. They are parents, and they're not
Mhm.
meant to be, and walking away is probably the best thing for the child, and I know a lot of that's controversial, but as someone who watched her birth mom walk away and basically like struggle and then find a way to thrive. I know that she wouldn't have thrived being my parent. My older brother and I, which if you listen to the other podcast, you know I do have another brother. I talk about Bo mostly, who's my younger brother, but I do have an older brother, Michael. He and I were left with like my parents' pastors, and we were there for like 2 months. By the grace of kind-hearted parents that I had, they spent those 2 months trying to find us, and they did. And so I basically lived with them my whole life. And so it's kind of easier to explain up front, and I'll probably have to re-explain again throughout the podcast. I call my mom and dad, they're my maternal grandparents because they were my mom and dad. They were the people who, stayed up with me when I cried at night. They were the ones who nurtured me into adulthood. They were the ones who showed me that unconditional love. Tara has known my entire family. And even though my childhood was kind of fucked up, I still had really good parents. And in fact, my parents tried to parent Tara a lot too. They were like,
It's fine.
come here. Because they just instantly loved her the way that I did. So my childhood, like my biological father, there was some abuse there. So I don't have a relationship with him.
Mhm.
He's my only technically living parent, but I don't have a relationship with him at all. In fact, yesterday was his birthday, and the only reason I know that is because when I was filling out my what's it called? My passport renewal. I had to put his birthday and I had to look it up on Facebook. I was like, I don't know. And then the lady was like, you didn't have to put it if you didn't know. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. But
Aw. You're like, cool,
I
should
was
have told
like,
me first.
right? Shouldn't trauma. But like Tara mentioned earlier, I did grow up in an evangelical church. It
Mhm.
wasn't until after I left and had been out and we were doing the other podcast that I realized I had been in a cult. I mean, there were just moments like looking back, like I've thought about, like where people in my church who weren't my family were making decisions on how I should live my life and
Mhm.
what was acceptable for my life. And that's not okay at all. And it was extremely controlling, and my whole life was wrapped up into it. In fact, I met
Mhm.
Tara through people I knew that were in in the same church.
Mhm.
And Tara wasn't really like part of that. She just like knew the people that I knew.
Mhm.
I don't know. It's really weird to talk about because like sometimes when I like hear cult stories, like this isn't like it's not going to be like the Branch Davidian. Like there wasn't
Oh,
that kind of
no.
stuff, but there was definitely some inappropriate things. Like the more that I think about it, like my youth pastor let me be in a relationship with a person who was 7 years older than me when I was in high school and like knew about it and didn't
Mhm.
like threaten to call the police, didn't threaten to like take action to end it. It was sanctioned essentially. Like, and at one point in time, like this is something I've thought about recently because he and I had this like off again, on again relationship all through high school. And it didn't really become physical until I was like a junior in high school.
Mhm.
Um,
How
he
old
was
was he
seven
at
years
that
older
time?
than me.
Okay, so, like, 24
That's how old, yeah, like 23,
ish?
24, about the time
Yeah.
that like, and when you're 17 or you're 16, 17 years old and you're like thinking
Mhm.
about it and you're like, it's no big deal that I'm making out with this like 24-year-old, 23-year-old guy,
I'm so cool.
right? But like I've been a 23-year-old woman and have been like, I would have never made out with a 17-year-old.
No.
Right? Like that's not a thing. Like you don't
Mhm.
think about. And But when I was a freshman in high school, or like maybe freshman, maybe it was between my freshman and sophomore year of high school, he
Mhm.
dated someone 2 years younger than me.
Mm.
And our youth pastor knew about it because she talked to me about it.
What'd
And
she
I'm
say
like,
about
"How?"
this to you?
I remember, like, we were talking about it and she was like, I think she was trying to, like, deter me from him, like, she was trying to, like, when you talk shit about someone so that the other person is like, "Oh, okay, they're bad people." She's like, "Yeah, I constantly have to get onto them because they're always being so physical," and I'm like, and I couldn't quite understand, like, what she was doing at the time, like, I was like, "Why are you trying to hurt me?" You
Yeah,
know? But, like, her responsibility would have been to call the police. Her
right.
responsibility, and I remember somebody had talked about it once, and she said that, like, the girl's parents were okay with it, but that's still not okay. And when you're a youth pastor, you are considered a mandated reporter.
That was
Because
my next question.
when I was a youth intern, like, when I worked in the churches and stuff, I was a mandated reporter. Like, if someone
Right.
came to me, in fact, that happens when I was the kind of like the assistant youth pastor in Corning, a girl in the youth group had come up to me and told me that she had been molested or had been raped. That's what it was. And I
Mhm.
remember I was like, well, this is a big thing. And I have to go talk to Pastor Tim about it. And I have to go talk to it was just not the same youth pastor. I want everyone to know, different person. But I remember like going to him and then he talked to her and then she ended up backtracking her story. And so I don't really actually know if it was true or not, or if she was just like what was happening. Her story didn't really seem plausible to me,
Mhm.
but it also could have been,
You still
because
did your due diligence rather than sweeping it under the rug. And how did he react when you went to him about that?
oh, he immediately was like, I need to bring her in. We need to call her. It was her grandmother. We need to call her grandmother and then we need to
Mhm.
call the police.
Oh, good. Mhm.
And he's like, he wanted to put her in a safe place before he could like get the police involved. And
Sure.
her grandma got there and her grandma was like, not, I remember being in the room and her grandma wasn't like, oh my God, you're lying. But her grandmother was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry this happened to you. And before it really even became like, we're going to call the police now, she was like, I made it up. I was like, oh, okay.
Jeez.
And it was kinda hard because at that point, it's like, "Oh god," and people too, like, I had a cousin who made shit up once because she
Mhm.
wanted attention, and that makes it bad for those who do actually get, like, raped, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because then they're not believed, so the grandmother and the girl ended up going to counseling, which I thought was good.
Mhm. Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Mhm. But
Yeah,
that's
and
not
I
how
feel
mine went.
yeah, but I was gonna say, I feel like too, that's pretty rare, I feel like is a good way
Oh,
or
yeah.
a good way to
Yeah.
describe that because we see in all these documentaries and everything else, everyone's well, in your own situation, like, "Are you sure
Mhm.
this happened? Is this true?" Or like, "No, no, 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 so and so's such a good boy, he would never."
For me, like, looking back, like, there's been times where I've wanted to confront that youth pastor and been like, "What were you
Mhm.
doing? Like, you
Yeah.
saw me going down this path." And it kinda started putting asterisks in my life, like, "This is
Mhm.
illegal," but so it's like, when I
Mm.
it's why I understand things like when we talk about cults,
Mhm.
like, how people can rationalize, like, marrying a 15-year-old.
It becomes so
Someone in the
normalized.
Yeah, and I think what happens especially in small towns and in small town churches, it's like suddenly, like, because I've seen it happen in multiple churches, like, I had a friend in a neighboring church, they had rules, like, they weren't allowed to physically touch until she turned 18, but they could, like, hang out in a group setting and things like that,
Mhm.
and, like, her parents were always there, so I was like, "Okay," like, it's not great because he's older and he's, like,
Mhm.
waiting around, but for me, I didn't realize how traumatizing that had been, like, I just kinda moved on in life and was like, "Oh, this is just part of my story," because it is the person I lost my virginity to. Granted,
Mhm.
it was not a it was not one of those moments where it was like, it's a technical, but it wasn't real like,
Oh
it was
boy.
like, went in and I immediately regretted, so I pretended like it didn't go in. Yeah, it was, Yeah, no, I thought quick on my because I just felt like it was wrong because I like at that point
Yeah.
in time I had like saved myself so much and I'd done other things, you know, like
Mhm.
I was that Christian girl who was like, I'm saving myself for marriage, but like, you know,
Mhm.
I can do other
Everything
things.
but
Wink,
type of things,
wink, right?
right?
Like, yeah,
Mhm.
because that's how evangelical churches are. It's like you
Sure.
have this purity ring. Like I had 2 purity rings in my life. One, I think I just outgrew it, and then my dad got me a second one,
Mhm.
and it was like an emerald because that's my birthstone, and I wore it on my ring finger. And I remember even after I lost my virginity, I wore that, and I remember being in, like, an assistant youth pastor and, like, talking about,
Mhm.
like, saving yourself from marriage, clearly not a virgin.
Ah!
Like, it was
Uh-huh. Yeah.
and, like, having to make eye contact with people who probably knew that I was not a virgin
It's
was
fine,
really
it's fine.
awkward,
Okay,
really
pretend
awkward.
right now.
Right, because that's what you do in church. It's like,
Uh,
don't look at the hypocrisy of what I'm doing, like,
sure.
for
Do
sure,
as I
it's
say,
just
not as I do. Mhm.
1,000%. Other than that, I had, like, a really good childhood. I played softball, I had really great friends. I was really confident as a kid, like and I think that also because I had a gap tooth, like, I had a big gap between my
Mhm.
2 front teeth, and that'll teach you confidence real fast,
Yeah.
because it was also I remember the gap was really big when I was young, and they
Mhm.
had this commercial that would sing "Fall into the Gap," and it was, like, this whole thing, and this one boy in school would, like, sing it to me because of my gap teeth,
Sure.
and I know, and then I would spit water at him through it.
Oh my
It
god, I love
You
this.
know what? And, like, looking back,
It's very
like,
on
if I
brand.
ran in yeah, if I looked back and, like, ran into him as an adult, I would be like, "You kinda, like, taught me how to have tough skin," because
That's
that
a good way to look at
and then I
it.
got braces, and now I have, like, great
And
teeth.
now it's gone. Yeah.
I have people tell me all the time that they're like, "Wow, you have really good teeth," and I was like, "Yeah," which is the my lower teeth are kind of, like, weird, but which was a big thing in my marriage. Thomas hated,
Mm,
my bottom teeth, and then I
interesting.
found out that fucker was missing a tooth on his bottom teeth. It
He was
was, like, the great
projecting,
oh
obviously.
my god, it was like this moment, like, we were in Sutter Creek with his parents, and we were standing there, and I smile, and I don't know, like, when you smile, like, yes, sometimes your bottom teeth show, but most of the time,
Sure.
it's just your top teeth.
Because of your
And
mouth,
I
yeah.
remember I smiled and my bottom teeth were showing, and he was like, "Oh, your bottom teeth are showing," because it really bugged him that they were and, like,
Mhm.
they're not that messed up, they're just
I've been like,
there's a
"My guy,
little ex
you have a receding hairline. Do you really wanna talk about my teeth?"
right? And
This is, for context, this is Jessica's ex-husband who I
yeah,
hate.
no, I'm not
So
married anymore. Yeah, no, Tara and I hate each other's exes, which is
yeah.
like that's the meme. It's like nobody hates your ex like your best friend who doesn't forget. It's literally
It's
us. And then I was like, I was kind of embarrassed about it for a second. And then his mom, who towards the end, she and I didn't get along, but this was like a clutch moment, Pat. Like, oh my God, this woman
Mhm.
came in for me. She's like, what are you talking about? And I was like, see how my bottom teeth, like, there's not enough space. So they kind of like flare out and they're like not straight. And she goes, "Well, your teeth look fine. Like I've known you." At this point, she'd known me for I don't know, like 7, 8 years. And she's like, "I've never noticed
Mhm.
it before." And I was like, "Oh," she goes, "Yeah, but." She goes, "Thomas, why are you even saying anything? You're missing a tooth on your bottom mouth." And I, in public, reached over, grabbed that man's lip, and pulled it down. And I was like, "How fucking dare you?" And his whole like his dad was like, "You've been making fun of her teeth?" He's like, "She has great teeth." I was like, "And I have like," because my ex would be like, touch sugar and he'd get a cavity. And I'm like, "I have strong
Mhm.
teeth." Like,
Mhm.
we hope I think that was also part of it is like we were talking about the fact that I hope our kids get, when we were thinking about having kids, get my teeth. Granted,
Right.
my front teeth are huge, but I think they're quite fun, actually. I like my
Not
teeth.
huge.
They feel,
Good.
you know what I'm saying.
Yes, yes, I know.
But I know, and so it was just like a moment of like, "Oh my god," but yeah, no, sorry, that was a tangent, my bad.
No, I love it. That's the whole point of this. So, I do wanna kinda scoot back a little bit, though. One of the main focuses, obviously, is the, church background and stuff. I want to talk about your bio mom for a minute because well,
Ah,
yeah, well, not what you're thinking. We can talk about that part too. But
okay.
what I wanna talk about is how your mom was professionally like, how she worked and it was around the entertainment industry because this has been I've been thinking about this, like, so much, and I
Oh.
know you were a kid because it's, like, ever since the topic of, R. Kelly's conviction, and now we have all of this
Mhm.
Diddy stuff, I'm just really curious, like, obviously, you were very, very far removed from a lot of stuff, but I'm
Yeah.
curious how the people you were around and the things you were seeing from your child's lens, now looking at it, because that whole hindsight thing with the boyfriend, I'm curious if there's, like, anything interesting at all or
Oh,
anything
I
funny
wish.
stories. What you got? Nothing, nothing? Or
I
anything you've
mean, okay,
heard from your mom?
s
I'd love to know.
uh, I mean, I will tell okay, I'll tell a couple of stories that my mom has told me in the past, but this wasn't when she
Mhm.
worked in the industry, it was, like, when she lived in LA. But for those of you who are wondering, my mom worked for Tower Records for about 5 years in the late '90s, and, she worked as, like, the buying and purchasing manager. So, basically, when you would go into, like, a tower like, for those of you who were around back then, some of you are like, "What the fuck is Tower Records?" Respectfully, it's
Oh,
fine.
yes.
It doesn't really exist anymore. But it was basically like it was a huge competitor. It's actually out of here in Sacramento. Like, I drive by the Tower, like, cafe all the time, back where my mom worked and stuff like that, like, all the time. My mom so when I was young, I was having a really hard time in 6th grade because I, like, transitioned from private school to public school. There was a bunch of kids that just, like, were really mean to me. Like, a kid almost murdered me, I swear, on the playground. And my biological mom was like, "You're gonna come live with me." And so she would run up, like, I still did everything that I had done before. So it was probably about, like, 3 or 4 months. It wasn't, like, a huge amount of time, maybe 6 months total, but I lived with her for a bit, and I wasn't doing well in school down here either because I went from, like, Las Molinas Elementary School, which was, like,
Mhm. Very
so
rural, small.
tiny to, like
Mhm.
yeah, to, like, like, Natomas Middle School, which was I don't know the actual name of it, but it was, like, huge, but I
Mhm.
didn't do well, so basically, I became homeschooled with my mom, and I'd go to work with her, and I would sit in her office and do work. My mom being the buying and purchasing manager, when they would give celebrities tours, they would take them through the warehouse where her office over the years, I got to meet, like, NSYNC and the Backstreet Boys, and I had lunch with Aaron Carter once, and my meeting them is like, "Hi, this is my daughter," and I never really took
Sure.
pictures because it was, like, considered unprofessional, but I did get things signed, like, they would come into the warehouse and sign a bunch of their posters that they would then, like, send out to, like, the stores. Because basically,
Mhm.
if you saw a display in a store, my mom was part of that team that, like, designed and
Very cool.
bought and shipped it. So I had a lot of really cool posters as a kid, like, I had posters that no one else had. I used to have this, like, surprisingly, because I don't like Madonna,
Mhm.
which I know people are like, "What?" I don't
Yeah, I didn't know
she's
that. Not that I really I mean, I know it
she's
sounds
just
fetching,
not
but I
my
don't really
thing.
care either way. Yeah.
Yeah, she's just not my thing, like, there was this, like, 3D poster of, like, her eyes would, like, blink when you walked
Oh
past it, and so
my
I had one of
god.
those, but it was kinda cool because it was, like, maybe 2 feet, maybe 3 feet long by, like, 2 feet
Oh my
tall,
god.
and it was, like, her eyes, and so,
Yeah.
like, like, it's one of those, like, when you move it, it,
Oh,
like, would, like, wink.
mhm.
It was, like, that kinda thing.
Yes, that's what
So I had that. Nine Inch Nails signed an actual poster for me, like, they wrote my name on it because, like, the
aw.
guy who worked in the warehouse was so cool, and he would always be like he'd always be like, "Yeah." My mom, one time while working there, one of her duties in the store was to make sure that, like, garbage stuff got picked up, like, and in New York, this was, like, a fast-paced learning for her. She didn't renew a contract for a garbage company in New
Mhm.
York and
Oh,
went with someone
no.
else, and then they got a phone call that 2 men had showed up on the lot to speak to her about that contract, and they had to, like, sneak my mom out,
Oh my god.
and then they just, like, apparently were paying double for garbage for a while. So,
Oh, what?
yeah. It's the fun stories, but, like, I didn't really see anything nefarious because it was all, like,
Sure.
at work. I mean, granted, did I go into Russ Solomon's office and see what I thought was a giant bowl of sugar on his desk? Yeah, no, I did. It was totally cocaine.
Oh, makes sense for the time. Mhm, yeah.
It was the '90s.
On brand, yes.
Because I remember being like, "Mom, why" it was like this bowl, it was like this big. It was yeah, it was, and I was like, "Oh
Like
god."
a fat
Uh
cereal bowl.
Yeah, essentially, like, with a lid, and I thought it
Oh
was
my
like, I
god.
thought it was basically, it looked like a sugar bowl, like, but,
Sure.
like, a
I
little
mean,
bigger.
no
Yeah,
sugar,
it
but,
really was a sugar bowl. Um, But, and, like, my mom would make me, like, run back and forth and, like, drop things off and
Mhm.
things, and it was great. And then my parents up here, like, my parents back home got my brother and I into a different, elementary school that they'd been working on, and
Mhm.
so I came home because I didn't necessarily want to still live with my biological mom.
Sure.
It
Mhm.
was it was a lot harder, but weirdly enough, in college, when I went away to college, a girl in my dorm, like my hallway, she was like talking to me. She was my upstairs neighbor
Oh my god,
in
small
that, and
world.
she was
That's
like,
crazy.
"My mom used to make me play with you." And I was like, "Yeah." And I did not want to play with you because I was so like at that point I was so shy of people. And
Oh.
she's like, she would like make me go out and play basketball with her. And I'd be like, I don't really want to play basketball because I'm, too shy to talk to anyone else, but this one girl. And so
Aw,
it was kind of nice.
I love
But
that.
but my mom did have other stories apparently. She used to party with,
Mhm.
like, what is her name? It's the other Arquette.
Who was also in a cult, the Arquettes, for a short time when they were
That's
children.
true. Alexis.
Alexis,
Alexis
okay.
Arquette. My mom used to hang out with Alexis Arquette and Steve-O, and yeah.
What? I didn't know about Steve-O, that's wild.
My
They
mom
were doing
these are
some
st
wild stuff.
you, like,
Same
knew my
fucking
mom
judgment.
when she was doing this, like, that's,
That's what's wild to
uh
me, I didn't even know Steve-O, oh my god. The world is
well,
so
it's also,
small.
like, I took, like, a grain of sand because, like, my mom would
Sure.
talk about it, and I would be like, "How come, like, I just," but I don't know, that's just what my mom told me, so
I mean, you never know. That's not her
I
f
never
that's not
know.
your mom has been around a lot of, like, notorious and famous people, it's really crazy if you think about
Well,
it.
mainly or just the one person in
Every
prison.
So why did your mom go to prison? What happened with that?
So my mom went to prison in the late well, so the real reason, like, was because my mom, stole a bunch of money from a casino in
Mhm,
Reno. She worked the system where she worked at the casino and basically would, like, cash people out on tickets that they weren't supposed to be cashed out. So she stole
mm,
$15,000 from a casino in Reno. She then picked up my little brother because I wasn't living with them, I was with my grandparents. She picked up my little brother and moved to Fresno with some drug dealers.
mhm,
And when they came a looking for her, one of the drug dealers was like, if you turn me in, you'll probably get less. So he went to prison basically for my mom. My mom turned herself in and then she was on probation. And then my stepdad, Bo's dad, had a so my brother, Bo is born in March, and I think his younger brother is born in April, same year. So, super
mhm.
classy man. He,
Busy on the
he
streets.
he's a very busy man. Basically, my parents had started getting, like, support,
Sure,
you know,
mhm,
for us, and it was coming to my parents' house, and my parents made a decision, and it kind of fucked over my mom.
mhm,
But it was like she wasn't allowed to do this. So basically it was getting state assistance. My parents gave her the check and she signed it, even though it was supposed to be my parents, and she cashed it, which
mm,
was a violation of her parole. And I think they had done this more than once. And my stepdad had like told his girlfriend, and then she called the police and violated my mom's parole. And even though like you run down and you say, like, well, this was just a misunderstanding,
mhm.
when it's a parole violation is a parole violation against the state. So
Sure,
she went to prison for 3 years. She
mhm.
was in Chowchilla. She was in there with Patty what's her face or Betty no, so Betty
Betty
Broderick.
Broderick, mhm,
Yeah, so she met Betty. She was also for a time period, like, she had to go to Reno for a bit, like, she stayed there for, like, a couple months. There
mhm.
was a lady who, like, ran over a bunch of people with her Cadillac.
Oh,
Mhm.
okay.
Yeah,
Interesting.
it's I can't remember her name, it's a pretty famous case, and she ran over a bunch of people because the voices in her head told her to, and my mom was, like, on the same cell block as her and could, like, hear her
Mhm.
talking to herself at night.
Oh my god,
Uh,
how scary.
right?
Like, so
Hopefully my
creepy,
mom's
like a
okay.
horror movie.
Pretty much. My mom had a rough stint in prison, and then she came back, and after she came back, there was just a lot of, like, she couldn't really hack it at my parents anymore,
Mhm.
and she left us for a while, and I didn't see my mom for probably, like, 3 or 4 years,
Sure.
and she was living like, weirdly enough, she was, like, living in Chico, which is, like, 30 minutes away, but, like, if you don't know where to look for someone, you don't know where to look for them, and
Sure,
so
and especially during this time too, like, obviously the internet is coming up
Mhm.
and more common, but it's still not as easy it wasn't as easy to locate somebody as it is now, especially someone who
Right,
didn't wanna be found, like
right. And then she moved to Sacramento and she, like, started working and she'd gotten a roommate who was like, "I think you should, like, go back to your kids. Like, it doesn't matter that you're angry with your parents." Because my parents were, like, trying to control her, I get it, like, they were, like,
Mhm.
trying but I don't think it was, like, really controlling, I think it was more or less, like, they were trying to, like, lead her in a right like, in a direction to, like, be a responsible person who had
Mhm.
children,
Sure.
not realizing that she wasn't ever going to raise my brother and I. I think they
Yeah.
were trying to get her to that spot where she could, and she was like, "No," like, resisting, and so people were not meant to have kids. It's not like you look at your kid and go, I love my kid. I'll do anything for them because that thought is there. But the
Mhm.
very next thought is, but if I didn't have you, this is what I could do.
Yeah.
And that's how it was for her. And I love my biological mom. I love her to the depths of my soul, but like
Mhm.
she just wasn't my mom. And
Mhm.
that's fine. She's still a very important person in my life.
Sure, yeah, 'cause they're like, 2 things can be true, absolutely.
Right.
So
She could be my mom and not my mom.
right, exactly. So, something that, like, keeps sticking in my head, and I've known this the whole time I've known you, but it's just like, I guess for me, I don't really I'm trying to think how to explain this without being like, "I'm just fucking dumb." So because the church and your life and everything like that was so
Mhm.
normalized when you stopped, I at the time, I didn't think anything of it, you know what I mean? I didn't think
Right.
anything of it. We're in our 20s, like, you had moved to a new place, work, all that stuff that goes on in your 20s, people like, stuff happens. So I was just like, "Whatever, blah, blah, blah." But I'm really curious for you for yourself, what was that really like specific point where you were like, I'm done with this because you were very involved with the church. Like you went to Bible college, you've done all these things.
Mhm.
What made you be like, this doesn't resonate with my life anymore as much?
Oh, that's actually a very easy pinpoint question. I knew you at this point in time, and I was still involved with church. Like, I left the church for a little bit because the pastor that I had been really close to, basically had been, like, ousted.
Mhm.
And it was this whole weird thing, and I felt really, like, hurt by it all because I had been so wrapped up in church because I was, like, literally drinking the Kool-Aid and was like, "These are my people, these are my chosen family, this is me," like, type thing, "This is who I'm gonna be the rest of my life." I let a lot of it get personal, and then when he was kind of, like, removed from being our pastor, I was like, "What the fuck? No, thank you. I don't wanna be here." I had left and gone to a different church for a while. I was kind of living what some people in the church would call a double life, like, I really was out partying, was fucking around, doing whatever, and then
Yeah.
showing up to church on Sunday, like, hungover.
It's funny though that people want to like talk and whisper and gossip about that thing. But if you really think about it, think about the number of them that are doing the same exact thing, but could be even doing worse things.
Right.
Well, that's the ironic part about it.
Exactly. So in
Mm.
2009, I was kind of dating this guy, you know him, and I up until this point, like, I had really bad periods. Like, I would just you remember, like, I'd be like, I can't function, like, the first 2 days of my period. Like,
Yeah.
I remember, like, I was working one day and I was, like, standing behind, like I was making a pizza because I worked at Round Table and I, like, dropped to my knees because I was in so
Mhm.
much pain from it. And people were like, "What is wrong with you?" I'm like, "I'm dying over here, but it's fine because 'cause I'm menstruating," which you cannot take off and, like, have, like, menstrual,
Yeah.
like, leave. So, I had been seeing this guy, and we'd been having protected sex, like, I wanna point that out, like, we weren't out here just, like, willy-nilly, like, not being protected, we were. But then I didn't get my period, and I was like, "What the fuck?" And then another month went by and I didn't get my period, and I was like, "Shit, am I pregnant?" And I took a pregnancy test, and at this point, I would have been, like, 2 months, so I would have definitely, like, lit up a pregnancy test,
Right.
and it
Mhm.
wasn't showing that I was pregnant, and I was like, "Okay, what the fuck?" And I was just starting to get really, really worried. Well, this is, like, the start of my polycystic ovarian syndrome, like, rearing its head, but having
Mhm.
no idea what it was, right? I went to the hospital and they were like, "You're fine, like, there's nothing wrong with you." And I remember being, like, really worried, like, the hospitals
Mhm.
told me there's nothing wrong, I haven't had a period, and, like, at this point, I think it was, like, 2.5 months. My relationship, like, was, like, falling apart that I was in because of this, because
Mhm.
there was, like, this moment where I thought I was, like, Well, the in my mind, because the American education system, I was like, "Well, I'm not getting my period, therefore I'm pregnant, but there's nothing in my womb." So, I was thinking, like, maybe I had, like, an ectopic pregnancy or something like that, and I was really
Mhm,
worried. And I remember I was in church, and I was at this point in time, I was living with my friend's mom because she was starting, like, a foster care system, right? Like, she wanted to get foster kids, and so she was, like, wanting me to help.
mhm,
So, I was living there, and my pastor at the time called my parents and I in, and I had talked to my parents about what was going on with my body, right?
mhm,
And my dad, was like, "That doesn't seem right, like, there's something going on, like, you need further testing," and, like, he was kind of looking into it like that, and I was just in a panic because, like, I was like, "What the fuck is wrong with me?" Because it was also, like, my hormones felt really off, like, I don't know if you remember this time, but, like, I
mhm.
would just, like, cry for no reason. I was so emotionally, like, I didn't know what was going on,
Sure.
but my pastor, they called me in and basically they told me that I had to leave the church and that I wasn't welcome to be there because I was leading others astray with what I was doing, and that they would hope that I would come back eventually once my life had gotten together. And I remember sitting, because I could have just gone to another church. There was plenty of them. And I
Sure.
remember
Mhm,
I was, like, sitting in his office, and I looked at him and I went, "I'm going through something really, like, hard right now, and I don't know what's wrong with me." And I thought my pastors would be someone I could, like, lean on and care about me because that's what they teach you in Bible college, you
mhm,
know? And he was like, "Well, we don't really want someone like you in our church."
mm,
And so I left and I never looked back at church. I didn't want to. My ex, Thomas, was like kind of wanting to get into church. He was raised Catholic, and the
mhm.
thought of going to like a Protestant church he liked. And so we went a few times, but I never really got into church again. My parents ended up leaving that church because it didn't sit well with them what had happened to me. And so it was a lot. In a way, it's like I left the church, but I was kind of asked to leave the church.
Sure, sure. But I
Mhm.
mean, like you said, you could have just made that instant band-aid and jumped right back into it somewhere else because it's not like this
Right.
was the only church that operated this way. It's
And
kind
I
of
had
like that.
other
Oh, go
churches I
ahead.
could have gone to that I had, like, relationships with, like, it wasn't something I could have just, like,
Mhm.
walked away from, but, like, I did, and I
Sure.
walked away from church. I looked at it as, like, this is a place like, the way I view church is it should be the one place that someone could go to and feel loved no matter what, because
Mhm,
that's what the Bible teaches you, is that you're to love a person unconditionally, like, in your heart, like, that's the, like, the greatest of all the Bible teaches you is love, but these were
mhm,
people who were supposed to be, like, the heads of the church going, because it wasn't even just like, "You can't come to our church," but, like, "You have to move out of the house you're living in because if you don't, we're gonna take away her," because she was the children's pastor, and they're like, "If you don't leave her house, she's gonna lose being a pastor."
mm.
Even though I wasn't doing those things in her house. So, so I lived with you for a while.
Yeah, you did, you did. And then from there, like, you did from what I remember, it was just like church really wasn't really a thing anymore after that, like
Mm-mm.
yeah. So
My
how did
parents were
you
still into it, but I
Sure,
just
yeah. But you as an adult, because you were, living life and, at that time
mhm.
with Thomas and doing your own thing and everything, did you go into any kind of therapy at that point, or was this more? Because we can also kinda jump ahead to when we had that episode with Rags, and that's kinda I know that was kinda like a, "Oh, maybe this was a cult."
I mean, I think I talked about it in therapy, like, as in these people hurt me and, like, that kinda
Sure.
stuff, but it was never
Mhm.
like, this was a cult, and
Yeah.
it was never brought, and I think it was because if, there's Tara mentioned a woman named Rags. She and I grew up in the same church, and we had her
Mhm.
on this Three Spook Girls podcast. We're talking about tarot. She and I kind of have like paralleled our lives in the fact that like as we were super into it as kids, there was a huge period of our adult life where we were like into the church. We have a lot of mutual friends that we met at the same Bible college. To me, like when she stepped away, I didn't even really, like, notice that she had stepped away because we were, like, living
Sure.
separate, like, lives, and then it just all kinda made sense, like, the people in our church were so controlling, even in, like, the way that our youth leadership was, like, formed, right? Like, there was our youth pastor, and then she had adult leaders, which we know that some of them were predatory, obviously,
Mhm.
and then she had, like, 12, which is a significant number in the Bible,
Mhm.
12 student leaders who basically ran everything for her, and looking back as an adult, all of our parents were influential within church. My
That makes
dad, for a
sense, yeah.
long period of time, was like the treasurer. He was like a board member slash deacon. He was somebody like who did my parents did couple counseling with people like
Mhm.
when things would go wrong, like they would talk to them. And my mom was the Sunday school superintendent. Like, she ran the Sunday school department and it was a big thing. And,
Mhm.
my like Rag's mom and dad, like, they ran the Wednesday night program, like, her mom was in charge of missionettes and her dad was in charge of Royal Rangers, and it was just this, like, whole big thing, and, like, we were, like, kids who had really influential parents, and so we were brought in, and I mentioned this I don't remember who we were interviewing, but I mentioned this, and it's, like, basically, they were wanting to put us in a house, like, the student leaders to, like,
Mhm.
live together, like, boys would have one floor, girls would have another floor, and we'd all be
Yeah.
together, and, like, and I don't really know what was the plan, but and then we weren't allowed to date each other, but there were
Right. Of
exceptions, like, if you wanted to date
course.
somebody, you couldn't be alone with someone of the opposite sex, like, even if, like, let's say we're like, "Oh, I'm gonna go," like, this was a conundrum. My best friend was a guy, his name was James at the time, he goes by Brian, but whatever. I
Mhm.
called him James. So he and another friend of mine and I were gonna go see, like, Spider-Man 2, and it
Mhm.
but she wanted to take her car home, and it was across town, and the conundrum was, how does he and I get in the car and drive to her house because we're not allowed to be alone together? And it was like, finally, it was like, well, because she was leaving earlier than we were. I had to go early with her and not help like what I needed to do because they were like, well, it's the only way this is gonna work because he can't go pick her up and come back here because then they're alone
Same
together.
thing.
So it was this whole crazy thing, and it was just I was like, this is ridiculous.
It's a lot of extremes, but then it's like, then you have these real life situations that happens, and then that's where I feel like a lot of the hypocrisy starts bleeding in, because it's like, "Oh,
Right,
well, because it depends who you are, because it depends who you are, you know?"
right, and then it was like, if you were dating someone, you could be alone with them, like, you could be in a
That's
car with
worse.
them,
That's
right? Like,
worse.
I remember pointing that out, being like, "Well, they're like, 'Well, they can go together because they're dating,' and I'm like, 'But he and I don't like, we don't wanna touch each other's no
We
parts.
don't wanna
We
be
just
naked together.
No, we just wanna, like, ride across we wanna go from, like, essentially New Way Market to Safeway, like, that's all we
Sure,
wanna do,
yeah.
like, Tara understands what I'm saying, but
Go
it's like,
down the
that's how
road.
far we right, we don't
Yeah.
wanna go very far.
It's funny and stupid, and I don't really know like, funny's not the right adjective, but it's just like, this is making it worse, and this is gonna make if they're dating, they're more inclined to break the rules
Right, they're more
that you're
inclined to,
trying to keep
like,
away,
get into it, which was
to go do the
happening.
things.
There was a couple that, like, they broke up, like, because of the fact that there was a lot of sexual pressure there. Think about it, like, I was allowed to be alone with someone who was 7 years older than me, not because we were together, but because, like, he wasn't a student. Like, that was one of the rules, like, you could be like, I could have gotten in the car with any adult man at church,
Mhm.
anyone over the age of 18 or not 18, like, who wasn't a student leader.
Not a peer. Mhm.
Yeah, like, it couldn't be someone I was, like, peer to peer with, and I was like, "This is so fucking weird."
Mhm.
So, when I left the church, there was a sense of, like, relief, Like, I felt like, "Thank fucking God I'm not here anymore." Like,
Yeah.
thank goodness, because it was like church had become so and I was already, like, struggling with shit, so terribly, and my mental health when I left the church was terrible, and then I just kind of was like, I'll go to church on Easter with my parents. It's Easter and
Mhm.
Christmas. And I was fine with that. And the more like one of the really hard things for me to reconcile is that they talk about how God is all this is love, but yet we have all this hate in the world. But it's people's choices to be hateful, but they do it in
Mhm.
the name of God. And it's like, this can't be a real thing. This can't be real. It has been like now I've gone through therapy and like talked about it and been like, this was a cult and I'm so glad I'm not there.
If anyone that's listening is resonating with this, whether they've already left or they're thinking of leaving, what advice or what would you tell them?
One, find someone who will support you. Like Tara supports me through basically every decision I make. But have someone you can talk to because that's where they get you to come back is when you are isolated and alone and you're like, I'd rather be with them. Also, like I have family who are extremely into church and things like that. And sometimes talking with them helps because it's like not all churches are the same, if that makes any
Sure.
sense too.
Mhm.
Some churches are like kind and loving and wonderful and great, and they're a place of like community. But if you find yourself in a place that's not, like either A, leave that church and find a different one, or decide whether you want to just get out. You know that I'll support you. Like, legit.
I love that. You're never alone. You're never alone. Even your spooky little internet strangers. We are here for you. All right. Well, now that we're done trauma dumping for the episode, I've got two hot topics that we have not in real life really talked about.
Ooh,
So I kind of want to talk about it. So, okay, we have two. So, the first one I really wanted to get your thoughts on was the Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni lawsuits happening right now. If
mm,
y'all are unfamiliar somehow, I don't know how, because it's literally like following me on every social media platform.
it's fucking everywhere.
This revolves around the movie It Ends With Us, and Blake and Justin, they co-starred in this film, and there are lawsuits upon lawsuits upon lawsuits happening, right? And these are all stemming from allegations of on-set misconduct and retaliation and things like that. So, quick summary on Blake's allegations that in filings is that on December 20th, she filed a complaint with the California Civil Rights Department accusing Baldoni of sexual harassment during the production of It Ends With Us. She alleges that he engaged in unwanted physical advances, made inappropriate sexual comments, and created a hostile work environment. Additionally, she claims that after she raised concerns, Justin and his associates orchestrated a smear campaign to tarnish her reputation and utilize social media and regular media outlets to disseminate negative information about her. It's very, very on the surface, guys. Okay. And now on the flip side, for Justin's response, what we have so far, he has denied allegations, describing them as false and intentionally damaging. In response, he filed a $250 million libel lawsuit against the New York Times because they had this huge article come out with everything when Blake filed her initial
Right.
complaints. And this was accusing the publication of defamation for its cover of those claims. And Justin asserts that the newspaper relied on, quote, cherry picked and altered communications and ignored evidence that contradict her narrative. Now, with this, there has been a lot of repercussions, of course, with serious allegations like this. This has gotten Baldoni dropped from his talent agency, WME. Additionally, several industry figures and organizations, including Colleen Hoover, which she has backtracked since then. And I am not going to put judgment on her because this is a really awkward spot for her to be in. People have come out, in support of Lively and also some people supporting Justin, which interesting enough, if you look at this, is more the general public rather than the industry people. And a lot of people think this has to do with the status that Lively and her husband, Ryan Reynolds, has. As of today, when we're recording this, January 12th, they are still ongoing. There's, I feel like, new lawsuits every day. The publicists have also submitted complaints as well. There is all kinds of things going on. So it's a big legal mess. There's a lot of screenshots out there. If you look this up on YouTube, I think the channel's called The Tea Spill. I'll link the videos down below. She breaks it down so well and in such a way that's easy to understand because all of these complaints, they're like 70, 80 plus pages each. So
Mhm.
it's a lot of complicated stuff, but I assume most people have at least semi heard about this. So what are your thoughts on this right now?
So, backtracking back to when It Ends With Us came out, which
Mhm.
have by the way, have you watched the movie yet? I can't remember if you had or
I
not.
have not. No. Mm-mm.
Ooh. When it first came out and everyone was criticizing Blake
Mhm.
because of how she was acting in interviews, how it was like this because it's a very if you don't know the book or the movie, It's centered around a woman who gets into a relationship and it turns violent. It's a like domestic violence situation. People were saying like, "Oh, she's all about like get the florals and go see the movie and blah blah blah." And it was very like surface level. But I kind of as someone who I haven't gone through like physical abuse, but I've gone through
Mhm.
emotional abuse for sure.
Mhm.
I've witnessed a relationship that had that kind of abuse.
Mhm.
And I thought about it as like, maybe this is just Blake, like, preventing herself from going to a negative space because that would be really hard to act.
Mhm.
There's a scene in there that's really, like, graphic and traumatizing, and I think it would be as an actor, right?
Mhm.
So when people were coming for her, I kind of was quiet and was like, "Well, maybe it's not what we think. Maybe she's just distancing herself for mental reasons." And it was the way that Justin Baldoni was, like, really pushing it was like he was pushing, but not like he was some sort of victim of Blake Lively, if that makes any
Mhm.
sense. It kinda
How
just felt
so?
weird. Like, I it was kinda weird because it was like every news outlet was coming out and saying like, "Well, why is Justin doing X, Y, and Z and Blake is acting differently? Like, why is Justin not going to this premiere or why is he not seen with her here or that?" And it was really kind of like focused on him and
Mhm.
like why was like this injustice happening to Justin? And I
Mhm.
was like, it's also not bringing to the forefront of the movie the fact that, like, it's about domestic violence and about getting out of a situation because ultimately that's what happens in the book, in the movie,
Mhm.
she leaves him.
Mhm.
And then I was like everyone was like, "We hate Blake and we hate Ryan," and I was just like that was like how the world was acting, and I was like,
Mhm.
I I just don't care anymore. Like, they brought up this whole, like, thing where she was kind of rude to, like, a reporter
Mhm.
'cause the reporter was, like, talking about her belly,
Sh
and I
Yeah,
was
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah, I know what one you're talking about, yeah, yeah.
yeah, and I was kind of like I didn't see that as rude, as just more of, like, Blake is probably not just, like, a warm and fuzzy person,
Mhm.
and that was awkward, and I don't know that I would have acted any different, like, I wouldn't have
Mhm.
been like, "Oh, cool, like, your belly looks great too," like, it's kinda like, I don't know, it
Mhm.
probably wasn't the best way to handle something, but it happened, and
Mhm.
it was one clip, and it kinda, like, brought this whole thing that Blake was this terrible person, and here's like, I don't know her. I've never met her,
Sure.
never met Ryan
Mhm.
Reynolds, like, they could be the most wonderful human beings, they could be the worst human beings, I don't know,
Mhm.
but when Blake came out with this count with the suit, right?
Mhm.
I was like, "Oh, okay." There were too many things in her suit that made sense that actually happened, like, they did have a meeting about the sexual harassment. That was something that has been confirmed by both like, that the studio has confirmed, like, "Yeah, we did this."
Mhm.
Like, she had
Mhm.
this complaint, and she came in, and then everyone was criticizing Ryan for going in, but, like, I would think that if I had a significant other, and I was being sexually harassed, I'd want my significant other right there with me to
Mhm.
be like, "Don't do this to my wife." And then Justin going after the New York Times because they quote unquote cherry picked, you know.
Oh, no, it's genuine, like, if
Right.
you read up on that one, there was specific parts of the screenshots, and there's been more. So, it's definitely, like, the vibe of, like, cropping, essentially, type of
Okay.
thing is what I took from that.
The New York Times is the publication. They're allowed to
Mhm.
just put a spin on the story that they want to put a spin on. Yes, we've talked about in the past that people have journalistic integrity that they should tell the whole story, but that doesn't mean they have to. I think what this is just two people who probably should never work together again,
Sure.
like having it out in public.
Mhm.
And I don't know if either of them are at fault or either or none of them are at fault or if he is or
Mhm.
she is, like, my thought is they probably should have just, like, handled this in private, and I think one of the things that it does do is it does take away from because 'cause I've seen the movie a few times, and it's
Mhm.
beautiful. Like, I remember Tara was like, "You need to read this book." I know a lot of
Mhm.
readers are like, "Oh, Colleen Hoover," but whatever, she writes good books. I like them. I thought it was really well done. It's just, like, don't sexual harass somebody or be like, a better coworker, like,
Sure.
like have the conversations. With all the shit, like when you really look at what's going on in the world, like you look at what like what's about to happen in our country. You look about like the Diddy shit that's out there. This is like I don't want to like
I do have to interject though. I would encourage you to read the other filings that have been done because I will say at first I 100% agreed with you. And I do have to say two things can be true at the same time.
Mhm.
She could have went through these things. He could have also went through certain things that he's speaking about. They could both be shitty people for all we know. What I
Right.
do know from what I have seen from what I've looked into in it is that there's documentation that she started blocking him out of all of the press stuff. That's why they were separate. She wanted him not there, period. And because he was the director, they were like, well, you can't not have the director and the other main character at these things. So they
Mhm.
were forced to keep separate, or she said she would not promo it at all. The florals thing, that was in her contract with Sony. So at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, it's shitty, but it's like, what are you going to do when your hands are tied with the contract, right? You
Right.
know? So I feel like that part is irrelevant. I'm assuming things like that were probably not in Justin's contract when he was promoting this. He was focusing more on the domestic violence message of it,
Mhm.
which I do think is the call that should have went. I think Sony had a huge lapse in judgment with that because for
Sure.
those that haven't read it, this story is based on Colleen's mother's experience escaping abuse herself. So this is a real, obviously it's not word
Mhm.
for word, like it's the fictional
Right.
story she created, but it does have those roots. And I feel like it's a very realistic understanding on domestic violence and why
Sure.
people don't leave. Yeah, I would just anyone interested in this that hasn't looked at both sides, I would encourage you to do so. That's not me defending him. That's not me defending her. That's
Mhm.
like I said, these could both be very awful people. But the truth is,
Right.
just because you're an awful person, I say this with quotes, you could be an awful person, but bad things can still happen to you. I genuinely hope, and I kind of feel like it will. I hope this goes to trial so that everything will be under oath. All of the evidence, everything they have is actually submitted to the judge. And, this can be analyzed properly because at the end of the day, there's a lot of messed up stuff on both sides. And what's interesting too is that I found out recently, I don't know if you had read this or anything. So, a couple like things to add on. So, Blake became very like, I don't know if problematic is the right word, but like kind of an issue in making stuff. So the cut that we see, that's Blake's cut because again, it came down to if we don't use my cut, if we don't do these, if I don't have the last words, like I'm not fucking doing this shit, basically. And so I'm like, I'm really curious because apparently the other cut, Justin's cut, is a bit different. I, at this point, have no interest in watching the movie, but I am curious if that other version was maybe closer to the book as far as that goes. So I'm like, that's really interesting. Not anything we will ever see. And while they were making these cuts, they've got texts and voice memos and all this other stuff like lining out how he wasn't allowed to touch it, he wasn't allowed to see it. Like Sony and them were basically like stonewalled him, which is interesting in itself on that front.
That is a really interesting choice on Sony's part because it's kind of like he's your director and you're choosing to like
And you're giving this preferential treatment to your actress. Very complicated and it's really interesting. So I was just kind of curious where your mind as was with that. And our other one is so depressing. What are your thoughts on the TikTok ban? Because yeah, when they hear this, it'll be just a few days away.
yeah, I haven't really looked into it a lot. Because one,
Sure.
I don't the only time I go on TikTok is like literally to watch what Tara sends me. I think one, it's kind of hard for me to like in like a free market society like we are to be like, no, you can't use this app, but like every other
Hmm.
country will. So like our friends to the north, Canada, will still be using TikTok and things like that. And
Yeah.
I think it's one of these things where people like we're so focused on TikTok and
Hmm.
there's so many other things in the world we should be fucking focusing on than TikTok. And I don't like 100% honest, I don't even know why it's being banned. Like, I didn't look into it at all. I was just like, "Oh, well, that's a weird choice."
Okay, well, then I will share my notes since you don't know very much about it. I just did this like just in case, but now I'm so glad I did. Okay, so on Friday, this past Friday, they concluded the legal arguments, right? On
Mhm.
deciding if they're going to close it down. So, according to the complaint and everything, TikTok faces a potential ban in the US due to the national security concerns over its Chinese ownership. In April of 2024, President Biden signed the Protecting Americans from Foreign Adversary Controlled Applications Act, which mandates that TikTok's parent company, ByteDance, divest its US operations by January 19th or face a nationwide ban. So they wanted them to sell it, right? And the US government argues that TikTok's Chinese ownership poses a national security threat, citing potential data access by the Chinese government. TikTok disputes these claims, asserting that it operates independently and that a ban would infringe upon the First Amendment rights of its approximately 170 million users in the United States. Upon their arguments, though, it kept going back to no, it has nothing to do with people talking and what they're putting on this app. It has to do with this protection of data. And then last month in December, a federal appeals court upheld the law promoting TikTok to appeal to the Supreme Court, which is what we are having now. And those were heard on the 10th. So during this session, several justices appeared inclined to support the government's position, emphasizing the national security concerns while also acknowledging potential First Amendment implications. President elect Donald Trump is set to take office on January 20th, has requested the Supreme Court delay the ban to allow for a political resolution. The Department of Justice opposes this delay, emphasizing that the urgency of addressing this national security risks that come associated with TikTok. If the ban does proceed, TikTok would be removed from our app stores, preventing new downloads and updates. Existing users may retain access temporarily, but the app's functionality would degrade over time, as we know. This development raises concerns among content creators and small businesses that rely on the platform for revenue and engagement. The Supreme Court's decision is anticipated to happen before the 19th. If for some reason it's in between when we record this and you hear this, I'll put a little something right here for you guys. For those watching on YouTube, you'll see it on the screen. For those listening, it'll be there from future Tara. This will determine like what is going to go on. And like I said, it is looking like they are just gonna stick with it and go with it. And as far as it goes for me, like I'm a larger creator on that app. So that does, it is sad to lose that community. I do a lot of true crime over there, so I don't monetize as much unless I'm doing brand deals. But for people that they are making that money, they are, shop affiliates, they have their small
Mhm.
businesses. And I also think about all of these authors who that's how they found their readers. Like think about, Geneva Rose, for instance.
Right.
She went viral and that's how The Perfect Marriage and same thing with Frida McFadden. And my hope is that it's not going to be, oh my God, let's find a way for TikTok to still exist. My hope is that whatever's coming next, because let's be real, there's already developers with stuff coming next. There's
Right.
Fanbase, there's Neptune, there's all these other apps that are going to be similar. So I really hope that whichever whatever of these apps come about in the next like months, years and whatnot, I do hope we're able to find some way to have that sort of community, because people keep saying, oh my God, the algorithm, and I'm like, yes it is, but at the same time the big thing is like that's the app where people could actually learn shit, could actually get real news out, could communicate,
Right.
and all of these things. And that's my issue, and I know that's a lot of people's issue as well. And if you're one of these people listening and you're like, well, I'm a consumer, so like these influencers just need to get a real job. And it's like, no, that's not the issue. Like there's much more to it than that if you think about it.
Right.
They're just trying to, fucking boomers, but it's fine. But yeah, it'll be interesting and I'm really
It's
curious to
not
kind of see what
understanding
comes.
technology. That's what this comes down to, is that
Exactly.
there is
Exactly.
this, like, people in our government who are completely 100% in charge, that don't
Yep.
understand technology, and when people are coming to them and are like, "That's not a thing. That's not how this works." No. It's like, I remember watching some of them where it's like like congressmen are like, "Well, what does it download my Wi-Fi information?" And they're
Mhm.
like, "If you no, it doesn't download it, then how does it, but it accesses it." Yeah, like how your phone accesses the internet because it's using that as the internet. Like,
Yeah.
how do you not fucking know this, yet you're a congressman? And
Mhm.
that's why, like, a lot of people, when they start talking to me about, like, political people, they're like, "Oh, like,
Yeah.
oh, like, you've met this person," and I'd be like, "Yeah, but, like, they're people." And it's like, for me, it's like, I don't think that TikTok is the data breach we need to be worried about, you know? Like, it's
Right, exactly. There's
I
so
really
many
think
more important things.
right, like,
This is what they
um,
pick.
this is the Simpsons syndrome. I remember my high school
Mm,
teacher
yeah.
taught me this, and I've stuck with this forever. The United States government wants us as Americans to be the Simpsons. They want us to be dumb, they want us to be uneducated, they want us to be, focusing on the puppet over here, like, "Ooh, shiny, look at the shiny TikTok band." What the
Mhm.
fuck is in the like, every time there's something really big, like, that's up front and people are paying attention to, I'm like, "What is happening in the background that nobody is paying attention to?" And it's like, I think in
Yeah.
this last year, or last year, like, when the whole CEO shooting happened, right? The
Mhm.
country, like, stopped and went, "Why did this happen?" Like, it was, like,
Sure.
one of the first times in a long time people were like, "What the fuck happened?" And then people were like, "Oh, this industry is literally treating people terribly and people are dying." Like, I work with doctors and we hear, like,
Mm.
complaints of people who are, like, they're literally in the OR, like, getting ready to do open heart surgery, and the insurance company is calling to see if it's necessary.
Like,
Do you
what
think
a
the doctor
messed
wants
up
to cut
thing.
them open for it's a risky procedure. They're not gonna just cut someone's heart
Right.
open for no reason, but they're like, couldn't you just give them this medication instead?" They're like, "Well, we did that, like, 10 months ago, and now we're here, so this is the step." And they're like, We don't know, so maybe hold off on this life-saving procedure." And it's like,
Vile.
it's why the entire country, like, didn't care.
Yeah.
They're like, "Oh, okay, well, sucks for him." Right?
Yeah.
Like, that's kind
Mm.
of how it went. And so my big thing with the TikTok ban is it's happening literally the same day as Trump's inauguration, like the same day. And what is going to be more on people's minds, like the average American? Is it going to be Trump being installed as the 47th president, or is it going to be the TikTok ban?
Yeah.
And then people are going to have the fallout of the TikTok ban. So I
Mhm.
know that I get called like a liberal woke person a lot.
This show has to do with society, so we have to
Right.
talk about these topics, and,
Right.
the thing is, like, we're not saying everyone has to agree with our opinions.
Right.
Obviously, Jessica and I have varying opinions on topics, but it's just like, there's more to it than just getting rid of an app. So,
Right. And
yeah.
to me, it's always like what is in the forefront.
Yeah.
And it kind of seems like this was set up to like be a big distraction.
We'll see what happens, I guess.
It kind of sucks because like I think TikTok is great. I think it's opened like how many people like have learned how to like you're right, like an education thing. Like people have learned to do things because they go on the app and like I do. Like sometimes I'm like, "Oh, I don't know how to do this." And I'll go instead of YouTube now, like that's where I used to go. Is I'll go
Mhm.
to TikTok because you know what it is? I can watch like 4 or 5 2 to 3 minute little tutorials on something versus having to sit through an hour, YouTube
Sure.
of a
Yeah,
tutorial. And I can
definitely.
see different people's perspectives because like I
Mhm.
might be like, "Well, this person kinda thinks the way I think, so I can do it this way." And
It goes back to that thing you just said about the Simpson syndrome. It goes back to
yeah,
that. I think it has a lot to do with just how much access we as a general population have been able to have with stuff all over the world.
I think one of the things I think about is, like, when we look back at, like, different eras of time, how,
Mhm.
like, news spread, it used to take, like, forever. Like,
We had to rely
people
on mainstream media.
do people not the reason why just so that people know, the reason why the inauguration of a president happens on the 20th of January has nothing
Mhm.
to do with anything other than the fact that we have the election in November. Back in the day, in the olden days, when they would
Mhm.
have to certify elections, it would take months. Now, because of like technology, we could literally change it to January 1. Like it could be January 1 on, but they needed that time to make sure they got all the votes in and got it. They needed to get to January 6th so that they could be able to certify the election. They needed the November and December to gather all of it up and get all of those in and counted and certified. So
Mhm.
it's not, and I think back in the day, it used to actually be in March. It was like
Oh,
farther into
wow.
the year because it
Mhm.
took forever. And
Sure.
then, like, I think when it got moved up, it was because of the fact that they're like, well, this is a good day. And I think it's a lot. Like,
Mhm.
this, whatever side you fall on, January 20th this year is going to be a big deal for people. And I think I need to remind myself to have a little bit more grace with people. I don't. I
Mhm.
don't have tolerance for people. And it's not because I'm like, well, what I think is right and you're wrong. But it is kind of, sometimes in my mind, it's what I think is right. And I spend a lot of time in that political world where I see how things turn and how things happen and why decisions get made. And, I think, to quote Governor Jerry Brown, there doesn't need to be a law for every person's issue. And I think the TikTok is like a boomer issue where they're not fucking understanding. So instead of just going to people who do understand and letting them be the authority on something, they're like, I'm just gonna I'm just gonna regulate this. Like, no, just shush up and go away.
Yeah, I feel you. Well, thank you so much for being our first interview, Jessica. I
Of course.
appreciate you. And now, if people wanted to find you on the social media, what is your handle and where can they find you?
Well, I do have a TikTok for the 5 days that it's left. I won't put more content on it. It's Spooky Aunt Jessie, but I don't actually do anything on it. But I do have an Instagram that is public if you wanna follow me over there. My handle is Jessica Bear Stanton. It's JESSKUH, bear like the animal, and then my last name, Stanton.
Awesome. And all of Jess's stuff, including her Substack, will be in the show notes for you. And you can find Social Seance Society on social media everywhere with the handle at Social Seance Pod. We're on Instagram, Threads. We are also on Blue Sky. So it's just social seance
Mhm.
pod dot bsk dot social over there. And you can watch the video version of these episodes on YouTube and also on Spotify for free. So definitely check it out if you're not listening to us over there. And for me, you can find me as spooky_sleuth on Threads, Instagram, and I'm also on Blue Sky. My Substack is the tea with tea. So, like the drink with the letter T, because I'm Tara, of course. And of course, you can check out our True Crime and Paranormal podcast, Three Spooked Girls, anywhere you get your podcasts. And with that, we will go ahead and close out today's social seance, and we'll see you next week. Bye, guys.
Toodles.